The morning sun crept over Deadwood like a reluctant visitor, casting long shadows across the dirt streets that would soon be churned to dust by horses and wagon wheels. Clara Hayes stood behind the greasy window of Murphy's eating house, watching the town wake to another day of sweat, whiskey, and gunpowder. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass-brown hair pulled tight into a practical bun, gray eyes that had learned to hold their secrets close, and hands already red from the morning's washing. She'd been in Deadwood for 3 years now, long enough for the townspeople to stop noticing her arrival, but not long enough for them to see her as anything more than the girl who serves the grub. That suited Clara fine. Being invisible had its advantages in a place where being noticed often meant trouble. The bell above the door jangled, and Big Tom Harrigan lumbered in, bringing with him the smell of last night's whiskey and this morning's tobacco. He was a regular, a miner who'd struck enough gold to eat meat twice a day, but not enough to leave this godforsaken place. "Coffee, girl," he grunted, not bothering to look at her as he collapsed into a chair that groaned under his weight. "And make it strong enough to float a horseshoe." Clara poured the coffee without a word, her movements practiced and efficient. She'd learned early that talking back only made things worse. In Deadwood, a woman who worked for wages was barely a step above the girls in the cribs on the wrong side of town, and everyone made sure she knew it. The morning crowd trickled in, miners heading to their claims, merchants opening their stores, gamblers who hadn't found their beds yet. Clara moved between the tables like a ghost, refilling cups, taking orders, clearing plates. Her arms ached from carrying heavy trays, and her feet throbbed in boots that had seen better days. But she never slowed. Murphy paid her $2 a week plus meals, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. "Hey, serving girl." The voice belonged to Jake Morrison, a cowhand who worked for the Box T Ranch outside town. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of meanness that comes from thinking the world owes you more than it's given. "This beef tastes like shoe leather. What are you trying to do? Poison us?" Clara kept her eyes down as she approached his table. "I can bring you something else, Mr. Morrison." "Mr. Morrison," he mimicked in a high voice, making his companions laugh. "Listen to her, boys. Thinks she's serving in some fancy Eastern establishment instead of this rat hole." He leaned back in his chair, eyeing her up and down. "Maybe you think you're too good for this place, that it—" The other men at the table snickered. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to remain still. 3 years of this had taught her that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'll bring you fresh beef," she said quietly. As she turned to go, Morrison's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His fingers were rough and dirty, leaving smudges on her skin. "Maybe I'm not hungry for beef anymore. Maybe I'm hungry for something else." The room had gone quiet. Clara could feel eyes on her, some amused, some pitying, most simply indifferent. This was Deadwood's morning entertainment. "Please let go," she said, keeping her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Morrison's grip tightened. "Or what? You'll call for help?" He looked around the room with exaggerated concern. "Anyone here planning to help the serving girl?" Silence. Clara yanked her arm free and stepped back, nearly knocking into another table. Morrison laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "That's what I thought. Know your place, girl." She retreated to the kitchen where Murphy stood over the stove, his massive frame blocking most of the heat. He'd heard everything. The walls were thin as paper, but he didn't look up from the pan he was tending. "Get that order out to table 3, he said gruffly. "And stop causing trouble." Clara bit back her response. Causing trouble. As if she'd asked for Morrison's attention. As if she'd done anything but try to serve breakfast to men who saw her as less than human. But Murphy didn't care about right or wrong. He cared about keeping customers happy and money flowing. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of orders, insults, and small humiliations. Someone accidentally spilled coffee on her apron. Another man left his payment in a puddle of tobacco spit. Sheriff Dalton came in around noon, his star glinting in the dim light, and made a point of brushing against her every time she passed his table. "You're looking tired, Clara," he said, using her first name like he owned it. "Maybe you need someone to take care of you, make life a little easier." She knew what he meant. Dalton had been circling her for months, like a wolf waiting for the sheep to stumble. He was married, but his wife lived back east, and in Deadwood, that was as good as being single. He had power, money, and the kind of cruel streak that made even hardened miners step carefully around him. "I manage fine on my own, Sheriff," she said, refilling his coffee cup with a steady hand. "For now," he said, his pale eyes never leaving her face. "But winter's coming. Gets mighty cold in that boarding house room of yours. Mighty lonely, too." Clara escaped to the kitchen again, her skin crawling. She scraped plates and washed dishes until her hands were raw, focusing on the work to keep her mind off Dalton's words. This was her life, an endless cycle of serving, cleaning, dodging unwanted advances, and counting pennies to make sure she could pay for her room and maybe save enough to what? Leave? Go where? She had no family, no connections, nowhere that would be different from here. As the afternoon sun beat down on Deadwood's dusty streets, Clara took a rare moment to rest, sitting on an overturned crate behind the restaurant. The air smelled of horse manure and wood smoke, but it was better than the grease and sweat inside. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be young and full of hope, before James had promised to marry her and then disappeared with her savings and her dreams. "Clara!" Murphy's bellow brought her back to reality. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt, and returned to the dining room. A new group of cowboys had arrived, trail dust still clinging to their clothes. They wanted whiskey and beef, and they wanted it fast. As she served them, one of the cowboys, older than the others with graying temples and kind eyes, actually thanked her. The simple courtesy was so unexpected that Clara almost dropped the plate she was carrying. He noticed her surprise and tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of respect she hadn't seen in months. "You're welcome," she managed to say, the words feeling strange on her tongue. The day wore on, each hour blending into the next. By evening, Clara's feet were numb and her back screamed with each movement. But she kept working. The dinner crowd was rougher than the morning shift. More liquor, less restraint. Fights broke out regularly, and more than once she had to dodge flying fists or broken bottles. As she cleared a table near the window, she caught sight of her reflection again. The woman looking back at her seemed older than her 24 years, worn down by constant work and casual cruelty. "Is this all there is?" she wondered. "Is this what I've become? Just another forgotten soul in a town full of them?" The thought was interrupted by a crash from the corner. Two men had started arguing over cards, and before anyone could intervene, they were rolling on the floor, fists flying. Clara pressed herself against the wall, waiting for it to end. This was Deadwood. Violent, unforgiving. A place where only the strong survived and the gentle were ground to dust. As she watched the chaos, she didn't know that tomorrow would bring a stranger to town. A quiet cowboy with steady hands and eyes that saw more than most. She didn't know that her life of invisibility was about to end, for better or worse. All she knew was that she had tables to clear, dishes to wash, and another day to survive in a place that had forgotten what kindness looked like. The fight ended with Sheriff Dalton pulling the men apart, enjoying his moment of authority. He caught Clara's eye and winked. A promise or a threat, she couldn't tell which. She turned away and went back to work, just another shadow moving through the smoke and noise of Murphy's eating house, waiting for a salvation she no longer believed would come. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after dawn, a brown smudge against the pale sky that gradually resolved into the shape of a lone rider. Ethan Cole had been on the trail for 6 days, following the work wherever it led, and Deadwood was just another stop in a life measured by seasons and cattle drives. His horse, a grizzled bay named Scout that had seen better days, picked its way down the main street with the careful steps of an animal that knew rest was near. Ethan was 32, though the sun and wind had carved lines into his face that made him look older. His shoulders were broad from years of ranch work, his hands scarred from rope burns and barbed wire. He wore his solitude like armor, preferring the company of cattle and stars to the complications that came with town life. But winter was coming, and he needed work that paid in cash, not just beans and bedroll. He tied Scout to the hitching post outside Murphy's eating house, giving the old horse a pat on the neck. The smell of coffee and bacon drew him inside, along with the promise of his first hot meal in days. The morning crowd was already thick, the air heavy with smoke and conversation. Ethan found an empty table in the corner, his back to the wall, out of habit. In his line of work, you learned to watch the room, or you didn't last long. A woman emerged from the kitchen, carrying a coffee pot that looked too heavy for her thin frame. She moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible, but Ethan noticed the way she favored her left foot slightly, probably from hours of standing. "Coffee?" she asked, not quite meeting his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. And whatever's hot for breakfast." The ma'am made her pause for just a moment, as if the courtesy was unexpected. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the kind that came from more than just hard work. She poured his coffee with steady hands despite the weight of the pot, and he noticed they were red and chapped from washing. "Beef and biscuits is what we got," she said quietly. "Sounds fine." She nodded and turned to go, but Jake Morrison chose that moment to stick out his boot. The woman, Clara, he heard someone call her, stumbled but caught herself on the edge of another table, the coffee pot sloshing dangerously. "Careful there, clumsy," Morrison laughed, his companions joining in. "Though I wouldn't mind if you spilled that coffee. Give you a reason to get on your knees and clean it up." The laughter grew louder, uglier. Ethan watched Clara straighten, her face carefully blank as she continued to the kitchen. He'd seen that look before, on horses that had been broken wrong, all the fight beaten out of them until only endurance remained. Morrison wasn't done. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he called after her. "Show some respect when a man's speaking." Clara stopped but didn't turn around. The room had grown quieter, the way it did when folks sensed sport coming. Sheriff Dalton, sitting at a nearby table, watched with undisguised interest, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I'll bring your order right away, Mr. Morrison," Clara said, her voice steady but hollow. "That's not what I want to hear." Morrison stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I want an apology for your clumsiness. On your knees would be appropriate." Ethan had seen enough. He'd witnessed this kind of cruelty in a dozen towns, usually kept his head down and moved on. But something about the woman's quiet dignity, the way she held herself despite everything, made him set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "The lady said she'd bring your order," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the room without being raised. "Seems to me that's good enough." Every head turned to look at him. Morrison's face flushed red, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun belt. "And who the hell are you?" "Just a man trying to enjoy his breakfast." Ethan remained seated, relaxed, but his eyes never left Morrison's. "Hard to do with all this noise. You hear that, boys?" Morrison looked around at his companions. "This saddle tramp thinks he's going to tell us how to behave." He took a step toward Ethan's table. "Maybe you don't know how things work in Deadwood, stranger. We don't take kindly to drifters stirring up trouble." "Funny," Ethan said mildly. "I was thinking the same about men who need 3 friends and a badge's approval to hassle 1 woman." The reference to Dalton wasn't subtle, and the sheriff's smile vanished. He stood slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. "You got a name, cowboy?" "Ethan Cole. Been working cattle from Texas to Montana for 15 years. Never caused trouble that wasn't brought to me first." He finally looked at Dalton directly. "Never needed to hide behind a tin star to feel like a man either." The insult hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Dalton's face darkened, but before he could respond, Murphy burst out of the kitchen, his bulk filling the doorway. "No fighting in my establishment," he bellowed. "Morrison, sit down or get out. You," he pointed at Ethan. "Your food's coming. Everyone else, mind your own business or eat somewhere else." The tension slowly deflated. Morrison sat back down with a muttered curse. Dalton returned to his seat with a look that promised this wasn't over, and conversation gradually resumed. Clara emerged from the kitchen with Ethan's plate, approaching his table like she was walking through a nest of rattlesnakes. "Thank you," she said quietly as she set down his food. And for the first time she met his eyes. They were gray, like storm clouds, and held depths of weariness that made him wonder what else she'd endured. No need, he replied. Man should be able to eat in peace. That goes for women serving the food too. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or a hope so fragile she didn't dare acknowledge it. Then she was gone, back to her rounds. But Ethan noticed she moved with slightly more confidence, her shoulders a little straighter. He ate slowly, watching the room. This was supposed to be a simple stop. Find work for the winter, save some money, move on come spring. But he'd already made enemies, and in a town like Deadwood, that was dangerous for a man without connections. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret speaking up. He'd seen too many good people ground down by petty tyrants to stay silent anymore. After breakfast, he asked Murphy about work. The big man looked him over with calculating eyes. You just made some powerful enemies, Cowboy. Might be best if you moved on. I'm not looking for trouble, just honest work. Murphy snorted. In Deadwood? Good luck with that. But he relented enough to suggest trying the livery stable. Old Sam Hutchins might need help. He's particular about who he hires, though. Doesn't like troublemakers. Ethan paid for his meal and headed for the door. As he passed Clara, she was clearing a table, her movements quick and efficient. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she mouthed, "Thank you again." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement and stepped out into the morning sun. The livery stable was at the far end of town, a ramshackle building that had seen better days. Sam Hutchins turned out to be a grizzled veteran of the Mexican War who walked with a pronounced limp and had opinions about everything from horses to politics. I heard about this morning, Sam said, spitting tobacco juice into a bucket. Morrison's been needing someone to take him down a peg for years. Course, making an enemy of Dalton ain't the smartest thing a man could do. Wasn't planning on it, Ethan said. Just couldn't stand by and watch. Sam studied him for a long moment. You know horses? Been around them all my life. Can you fix tack, mend fences, deal with idiots who think they know better than you about their animals? Yes, to all three. Sam grinned, showing a gap where his front teeth should be. Then you're hired. $1 a day plus a spot in the loft to sleep. You provide your own food. And Cole, try not to get yourself killed. Good help's hard to find. The rest of the day passed in the familiar rhythm of stable work. Ethan mucked stalls, repaired a broken gate, and helped shoe a particularly ornery mule. It felt good to work with his hands again, to deal with problems that could be solved with patience and skill rather than guns and intimidation. As the sun set, painting Deadwood's shabby buildings in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan made his way back to Murphy's for supper. The evening crowd was rougher than the morning shift, and he kept his head down, not looking for more trouble. But he couldn't help watching Clara as she navigated between tables, dodging grabbing hands and crude comments with practiced ease. Sheriff Dalton was there again, his pale eyes following Clara's every movement. At one point, he grabbed her wrist as she passed, pulling her close to whisper something that made her face go white. She nodded quickly and pulled away, but Ethan saw her hands shaking as she returned to the kitchen. The protective instinct that had surfaced that morning stirred again, stronger this time. He'd spent years drifting, avoiding attachments, telling himself it was better to be alone. But something about this woman, this place, was challenging that resolve. Maybe it was the way she endured without breaking, or maybe it was just that he was tired of watching the strong prey on the weak. As he finished his meal and prepared to leave, Clara appeared at his table. Mr. Cole, she said softly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I wanted to... What you did this morning. It was nothing, he said. It wasn't nothing. Her voice was fierce despite its quietness. No one stood up for me in 3 years. I just wanted you to know it mattered. Before he could respond, she was gone, called away by Murphy's bellow. Ethan left money on the table and headed for the door, but not before catching Dalton's cold stare. The sheriff raised his glass in a mocking toast, his message clear. This isn't over. Outside, the night air was cool and clean after the smoke and stench of the eating house. Ethan made his way to the livery stable, where Scout greeted him with a soft nicker. He spent some time brushing the old horse, finding comfort in the simple task. Looks like we're staying for a while, boy, he said softly. Scout's ear flicked back, listening. Yeah, I know. Trouble seems to find us wherever we go. But sometimes a man's gotta make a stand, even if he's not sure why. As he climbed to his bed in the loft, Ethan thought about gray eyes and work-worn hands, about the courage it took to endure daily humiliation with dignity and tact. He'd come to Deadwood looking for nothing more than winter wages. Instead, he'd found something that might be worth fighting for, even if he wasn't ready to name it yet. The October wind carried winter's promise as it whistled through the gaps in the livery stable walls. Ethan had been in Deadwood for 3 weeks now, long enough to establish a routine, but not long enough to stop feeling like an outsider. Each morning, he'd see Clara through the window of Murphy's as he passed, already at work before the sun fully rose. Each evening, he'd take his supper there, watching her navigate the crowd with that careful grace born of necessity. They'd developed an unspoken rhythm, a nod when he entered, a quiet thank you when she served his meal, sometimes a word or two about the weather. Small things, but in a place like Deadwood, where kindness was scarcer than gold, they felt significant. It was a Thursday when things began to shift. Ethan was repairing a broken stall door when Clara appeared in the stable entrance, a bundle wrapped in cloth clutched in her hands. The morning light silhouetted her slight frame, and for a moment she seemed to waver, as if second-guessing her decision to come. "Miss Hayes." Ethan straightened, setting down his hammer. It was the first time she'd sought him out beyond the confines of the eating house. "Mr. Cole." She stepped inside, glancing over her shoulder. I brought you something. To thank you for that morning and for—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing all the small kindnesses he'd shown since. She held out the bundle. Inside was a loaf of bread, still warm, and a small jar of preserves. "I made them myself. Murphy lets me use the kitchen sometimes, after hours." Ethan took the gift carefully, as if it were made of spun glass. "This is too kind, Miss Hayes. You didn't need to—" "Clara," she interrupted, then seemed surprised by her own boldness. "Please, call me Clara." "Then I'm Ethan." He set the bundle on a nearby barrel, noticing how she kept glancing at the entrance. "Is everything all right?" She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "Sheriff Dalton's been persistent. He comes by the boarding house sometimes, waits outside, says he's just checking on the town's welfare, but—" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young. Ethan felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came before violence. "Has he hurt you?" "No, not physically. But he makes it clear what he wants. And in a town like this, a woman without protection—" She didn't need to finish. They both knew how that story usually ended. "You could leave," Ethan suggested, though even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. Where would she go? With what money? Clara's laugh was bitter. "I tried that once. Made it as far as Cheyenne before my money ran out. You know what kind of work is available for women without references or family? I came back to Deadwood because at least here I knew what to expect." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the restless movement of horses in their stalls. Then Clara straightened, pulling dignity around her like armor. "I should go. Murphy will wonder where I am." "Clara." Her name felt right on his tongue. "If Dalton gives you trouble, real trouble, you come find me, day or night." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something flicker in those storm-gray eyes. Hope, maybe, or just recognition of an offer genuinely made. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Ethan considered the question, wondering at the answer himself. "Maybe because you remind me that there's still good in this world worth protecting. Maybe because I'm tired of seeing strength mistaken for weakness just because it's quiet." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "I'm not strong, Ethan. I'm just enduring. Sometimes that's the strongest thing a person can be." She left then, hurrying back to her duties, but something had changed between them. A connection acknowledged, fragile as spring ice, but real nonetheless. The days that followed took on a different texture. Ethan found reasons to be near Murphy's during the quiet afternoon hours. He'd fix a loose board on the back stairs, oil the hinges on the kitchen door. Clara would bring him water or coffee, and they'd talk in snatches. About the weather, about horses, about nothing important and everything that mattered. He learned that she'd grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher who died when she was 16. She'd come west with dreams of marriage and a new life, only to have those dreams shattered by a smooth-talking man who disappeared with her savings. She'd been 21 then, young and trusting. 3 years in Deadwood had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. In return, Ethan shared pieces of his own past. The ranch in Texas where he'd learned to ride before he could properly walk. The cattle drives that had taken him across half the country. The loneliness that had become so familiar, he'd stopped noticing it until now. "Don't you have family?" Clara asked one afternoon, handing him a cup of coffee while he worked on Murphy's broken fence. "Had a sister once. Fever took her when she was 12. Parents followed not long after. Been on my own since I was 15. That's a long time to be alone. You get used to it." But even as he said it, he realized it wasn't true anymore. Somewhere between that first morning in Murphy's and now, solitude had lost its appeal. It was Sam Hutchins who warned him that trouble was brewing. The old stable owner pulled him aside one evening, his weathered face grave. "Dalton's been asking about you, where you came from, how long you're planning to stay. Man doesn't ask questions like that unless he's planning something." "Let him plan," Ethan said. But he checked his revolver that night, making sure it was clean and loaded. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Ethan was returning from delivering a horse to a ranch outside town when he saw Dalton's deputies gathered around the back entrance of Murphy's. His blood went cold as he heard Clara's voice, high and frightened. "Please, I need to get back to work." "Sheriff wants to see you," one of the deputies said. "Says you've been stealing from the till. Serious accusation." "That's a lie. I've never taken anything." "Tell it to the sheriff." Ethan didn't remember dismounting or crossing the street. One moment he was on scout, the next he was standing between Clara and the deputies, his hand resting on his gun butt. "Problem here, gentlemen?" The deputies, 2 of them, both young and eager to prove themselves, looked uncertain. They knew Ethan by reputation now, knew he wasn't a man to push lightly. "Sheriff's business," the taller one said. "Nothing to do with you, Cole. Miss Hayes is a friend. That makes it my business." Clara's hand touched his arm lightly. "Ethan, don't. It'll only make things worse. Can't get much worse than being falsely accused." He addressed the deputies again. "You have any proof of these accusations? Any witnesses?" The deputies exchanged glances. The sheriff says a lot of things. Doesn't make them true." Ethan's voice was calm, conversational, but there was steel underneath. "Now, I suggest you boys run along and tell Dalton if he wants to make accusations. He can do it in front of the whole town, not sneaking around back alleys like a coyote." For a moment, violence hung in the air like morning mist. Then the shorter deputy backed down. "This ain't over, Cole. Never thought it was." They left, casting dark looks over their shoulders. Ethan waited until they were out of sight before turning to Clara, who was trembling like a leaf in a storm. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "He'll find another way, another excuse." "Hey!" Ethan's hands found her shoulders, steadying her. "Look at me." When she did, he saw terror there, but also a flicker of something else. Trust, maybe. "He's not going to hurt you. I won't let him." "You can't fight the whole town, Ethan, and that's what it'll come to. Dalton has money, power. He has fear, that's all. Men like him, they only understand one thing." He released her shoulders, stepped back. "You finish your shift, I'll be close by." That night, Ethan moved Scout to a stall with a clear view of both Murphy's and the boarding house where Clara lived. He cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, and settled in to wait. If Dalton wanted a war, he'd get one. But what worried Ethan more than the threat of violence was the feeling growing in his chest, warm and dangerous as whiskey. Every time Clara smiled, rare as desert rain, something in him eased. Every time she brought him coffee, her fingers brushing his as she handed him the cup, he felt a jolt of connection that scared him more than any gunfight. He'd spent 17 years avoiding attachments, telling himself it was better that way. Now, watching Clara's window until her lamp went out, standing guard over someone who'd become precious to him without his permission, Ethan realized he'd already lost that battle. The question was, what was he willing to risk to win the war? As if in answer, Clara's window opened, and she looked out into the darkness. She couldn't see him, he knew, but she spoke anyway, her voice carrying on the night air. "Thank you," she said simply, then closed the window again. Ethan leaned back against the stable wall, rifle across his knees, and kept watch through the long night. Some things, he was learning, were worth fighting for. Some people were worth saving. And maybe, just maybe, in saving her, he might save himself too. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Ethan found comfort in their cold light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. Dalton wouldn't give up easily, and the town would choose sides. But tonight Clara was safe, and that was enough. For now. The trap was sprung on a Tuesday morning, just as the first snow of the season began to fall. Clara arrived at Murphy's to find Sheriff Dalton waiting inside, his boots propped on a table, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. Beside him stood Marcus Webb, the bank manager, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Miss Hayes," Dalton said, drawing out her name like he was savoring it. "Good of you to join us." Murphy stood behind the counter, his face red and sweating despite the cold. "Clara, the sheriff says money's been going missing from the till. Says Webb here saw you taking it." "That's a lie." Clara's voice was steady, but Ethan, who just entered behind her, saw her hands clench in her skirts. Now, Dalton stood slowly, his spurs jangling. "Mr. Webb is a respected member of this community. Are you calling him a liar?" Webb shifted nervously. I saw what I saw. Last Thursday evening after closing, Miss Hayes was alone with the cash box. I was counting the day's take for Murphy, like I do every night," Clara protested. "He asked me to—" "I never asked no such thing," Murphy cut in, not meeting her eyes. The betrayal hit Clara like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, and Ethan stepped forward, placing himself partially between her and Dalton. "Interesting timing, Sheriff," Ethan said conversationally. "Miss Hayes refuses your attention, and suddenly, she's a thief." Dalton's hand dropped to his gun. "You accusing me of something, Cowboy?" "Just observing. Seems mighty convenient, is all. The law doesn't care about your observations." Dalton's smile widened. "Miss Hayes, you're under arrest. You'll be held until the circuit judge arrives next month." Clara went white. A month in Deadwood's jail, under Dalton's control. They all knew what that meant. "Wait," Ethan said. "How much money are we talking about?" $20, Webb said quickly. Too quickly. "I'll pay it." Ethan reached for his pocket. "Consider it a loan to Miss Hayes until this matter can be properly investigated." "That's not how the law works," Dalton sneered. "She's a thief, and she's going to jail. Unless—" He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Unless she wants to discuss alternative arrangements. Privately." The meaning was clear. Clara's hands were shaking now, but her chin lifted. "I'd rather rot in jail than—" "Clara." Ethan's voice was soft but firm. "Don't." He turned to Dalton. "You've made your point, but this isn't over." "Oh, I think it is." Dalton nodded to his deputies, who'd materialized in the doorway. "Take her." What happened next would be debated in Deadwood for years. As the deputies moved forward, Ethan's hands shot out, not for his gun, but for the coffee pot on the nearest table. The scalding liquid caught the first deputy full in the face. As the man screamed and stumbled back, Ethan grabbed Clara's hand. "Run!" They burst through the back door into the swirling snow. Behind them, shouts erupted, followed by the crash of overturning furniture. Ethan pulled Clara through the narrow alleys he'd memorized during his weeks of watching over her, heading for the livery stable. "Ethan, stop!" Clara gasped, struggling to keep up. "You're making it worse." "Can't get worse." He yanked her around a corner just as a bullet splintered the wood where her head had been. "Keep moving." Sam Hutchins was waiting at the stable, Scout already saddled. "Figured you'd be coming," the old man said grimly. "Her mare's ready too. There's supplies in the saddlebags." "Sam, get. I'll slow him down." Sam hefted a shotgun. Been wanting to give Dalton a piece of my mind anyway. There was no time to argue. Ethan boosted Clara onto her mare, a gentle roan named Buttermilk, and swung up on Scout. They burst out of the stable's back entrance as the first of Dalton's men rounded the front. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that cut visibility to mere yards. It was a blessing and a curse. Harder for Dalton to track them, but also easier to get lost in the vast wilderness surrounding Deadwood. They rode hard for an hour, until the town was far behind and Clara was swaying in her saddle. Ethan led them to a small canyon he'd discovered while hunting, sheltered from the wind and hidden from casual view. "We'll rest here," he said, helping her dismount. She was shivering violently, her thin dress and shawl no match for the weather. "You're a fool," she said through chattering teeth. "Now you're a fugitive too. They'll hunt us both. Here." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders, then set about gathering wood for a fire. "We'll figure it out." "Figure what out?" Clara's voice rose, hysteria edging in. "We can't go back. We can't stay here. She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. "Oh God, what have we done?" Ethan abandoned the firewood and went to her, pulling her against his chest. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, sobs shaking her small frame. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. You were just trying to help, and now—" "Shh." He stroked her hair, which had come loose from its pins during their flight. "This isn't your fault, isn't it?" She pulled back to look at him, tears freezing on her cheeks. If I'd given Dalton what he wanted—" "Don't!" His voice was fierce. "Don't you dare blame yourself for not giving in to that bastard." She studied his face, seeing something there that made her breath catch. "Why do you care so much? I'm nobody, just a serving girl who brings you coffee. You're not nobody." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. "You're the woman who smiles even when the world gives her no reason to, who works herself to the bone without complaint, who faces each day with a dignity that puts the rest of us to shame." "Ethan, I've been drifting for 17 years, Clara. Never staying, never caring, never letting anyone matter. Then I walked into Murphy's and saw you, and everything changed." He laughed softly, self-deprecatingly. "I tried to fight it, told myself I was just passing through, but every day I'd find myself watching for you, listening for your voice, planning my meals around when you'd be working." Clara's eyes were wide. Her tears stopped. I hoped, but I didn't dare believe." "Believe it." He rested his forehead against hers. "I know this is a mess. I know we're in trouble. But I'd do it again, Clara. I'd face down Dalton and his whole gang if it meant keeping you safe." She closed her eyes, leaning into him. "I used to dream someone would say that to me, back when I still believed in dreams. Maybe it's time to start believing again." When she kissed him, it was soft and tentative, like she was afraid he might disappear. He responded gently, aware of her fragility, the trust she was placing in him. The kiss tasted of tears and possibility, of fear and hope, intertwined. When they broke apart, the practical reality of their situation reasserted itself. Ethan quickly built a fire, its warmth a small comfort against the growing storm. They huddled close, sharing what food Sam had packed. "We could head north," Ethan suggested. "Montana territory. I know ranchers there who'd hire us, no questions asked." "Us?" Clara's voice was soft. "If you'll have me." He took her hand, marveling at how small it felt in his. "I'm not much, Clara. Just a cowboy with a worn saddle and a bad habit of picking fights, but I'd spend every day trying to make you happy." "You already do." She squeezed his hand. "But Ethan, what kind of life would that be? Always running, always looking over our shoulders?" "Free," he said simply. "Together and free. That's more than we have now." They talked through the afternoon as the snow continued to fall, planning a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Clara told him about her dreams of a small house with a garden, maybe some chickens. Simple things, but her eyes lit up describing them. "I'm good with a needle," she said. "I could take in sewing, and you know horses better than anyone. We could start our own place eventually. Nothing big, just enough to get by." Ethan found himself caught up in the vision. "Maybe run a few cattle, breed some horses." "Children?" Clara asked shyly. "If we're blessed." He pulled her closer. "Though any daughter of yours would be too beautiful for my peace of mind." She laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her. And any son of yours would be too brave for mine? As darkness fell, they knew they'd have to move soon. Dalton would have men out looking, and the snow wouldn't hide their tracks forever. But for now, in this small shelter with the fire crackling and Clara warm in his arms, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in 17 years. Home. We should go, Clara said reluctantly. The storm's letting up. In a minute. Ethan tilted her chin up, meeting her eyes. I need you to know something. Whatever happens, whether we make it to Montana or Dalton catches us tomorrow, this afternoon with you has been worth everything. Don't talk like that. Fear crept back into her voice. We're going to make it. We have to. We will. He stood, pulling her up with him. But first, there's something I need to do. He went to his saddlebags and pulled out a small object wrapped in leather. Inside was a simple silver ring, worn smooth with age. It was my mother's, he said quietly. Been carrying it for 17 years, never knowing why. Now I do. He took Clara's left hand. I know this isn't how it's supposed to be done. No church, no preacher, no pretty dress. But Clara Hayes, would you let me court you proper? Let me put this on your hand as a promise that when we're safe, when we're free, I'll make you my wife. Clara's hand trembled in his. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Ethan Cole. I'll wear your ring. I'll go to Montana. I'll face whatever comes, as long as it's with you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if it had been waiting for her all along. They kissed again, sealing a promise born of desperation but built on something stronger, the connection between two souls who'd found each other against all odds. As they mounted their horses and rode out into the night, snow began falling again, covering their tracks like a benediction. Behind them lay Deadwood with all its ugliness and danger. Ahead lay uncertainty, hardship, and possibly death. But they rode together, and that made all the difference. The blizzard struck with the fury of a wounded animal, turning the world into a howling wall of white. They'd been riding for 2 days, pushing north toward the Montana border, when the storm caught them in open country, with nowhere to shelter but a decrepit line shack that looked ready to collapse under the weight of the wind. Ethan kicked the door open, half dragging Clara inside. She was nearly frozen, her lips blue despite the layers of clothing he'd wrapped around her. The shack wasn't much. One room with gaps in the walls that let the wind whistle through, but it had a small stove and a stack of old wood that might see them through the night. Gotta get you warm, he muttered, his own fingers numb as he fumbled with matches. The fire caught after several tries, weak flames that seemed to mock the cold pressing in from all sides. Clara huddled near the stove, shivering so hard she couldn't speak. Ethan pulled her against him, sharing what warmth he had, rubbing her arms and back to get the blood flowing. Outside, the storm raged like all the demons of hell had been set loose. Should have stayed in town, Clara managed through chattering teeth. Least jail would be warm. Don't talk like that. He pressed his lips to her temple, feeling the ice in her hair. We're going to make it through this. They'd had to leave the horses in the lean-to attached to the shack, and Ethan worried about Scout and Buttermilk surviving the night. But there was nothing to be done except wait and pray the ancient walls would hold against the storm's fury. As Clara slowly warmed, she became more aware of their surroundings and their situation. They were trapped, possibly for days, with limited food and no guarantee Dalton's men weren't still following. The ring on her finger caught the firelight, a promise that seemed fragile as frost in the face of such harsh reality. Tell me about your mother, she said softly, needing something to focus on besides the cold and fear, the one who wore this ring. Ethan shifted, making them both more comfortable on the hard floor. Her name was Mary Elizabeth Cole. She was small, like you, but fierce. Had to be. Married to my father. He was a good man but wild in his youth. She gentled him, gave him reason to settle. How did they meet? At a dance in San Antonio. Pa said he took one look at her in a yellow dress and knew he was done for. Courted her for 6 months before her father would let them marry. His voice grew distant with memory. They were happy. Even when times were hard, when the ranch was struggling, they had each other. Clara turned the ring on her finger, imagining another woman wearing it, another love story playing out across the harsh landscape of Texas. She would have liked you taking it on the trail all these years. I think she would have liked you wearing it more. He tightened his arms around her. She always said the right woman would come along when I was ready to stop running. Are you ready to stop running? He was quiet for a moment, listening to the storm batter the walls. I've been running since they died, Clara. Not from anything, just running. Like if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel the empty spaces they left behind. He pressed his face into her hair. But with you, I want to stand still. I want to build something instead of always leaving things behind. She turned in his arms, studying his face in the flickering light. Even if that something is built on the run from the law, we'll figure it out. Once we're in Montana, once things calm down, maybe we can send word back. Make restitution for the money they claim you took. Dalton won't chase us forever. He's too lazy for that kind of commitment. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the future he painted. But she'd had her dreams shattered before, and the storm outside seemed like a manifestation of all the forces arrayed against them. Ethan, she said carefully, what if we don't make it to Montana? What if... He silenced her with a kiss, gentle but insistent. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. We're going to make it, both of us, together. How can you be so sure? Because I've got something to fight for now. He cupped her face in his hands. For 17 years, I've drifted through life like tumbleweed, not caring where the wind took me. Now I've got you, and that changes everything. I'll fight the storm, Dalton, the whole damn world if I have to. The conviction in his voice warmed her more than the fire. She'd been alone so long, carrying her burdens in silence, that having someone willing to share them felt like a miracle she didn't deserve. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely audible above the wind. So am I. The admission seemed to surprise him. Scared of losing you? Scared of failing you? Scared that I'll wake up and find this was all a dream brought on by too much whiskey and loneliness? I'm real. She took his hand, placed it over her heart. This is real. They sat in silence for a while, holding each other as the storm raged. The fire burned lower, and Ethan reluctantly let her go to add more wood. As he did, something in his saddlebag caught his eye. A small book he'd forgotten he carried. My mother's Bible, he said, pulling it out. Haven't looked at it in years. Clara took it reverently, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Inside, in careful script, were the names and dates of the Cole family. Births, marriages, deaths, all recorded in fading ink. Look, she said softly, pointing to an empty space below Ethan's name. Room for more. The simple observation hit him unexpectedly hard. Room for more. Room for Clara's name beside his, for children they might have, for a future that extended beyond mere survival. Read something, he requested, settling back beside her. Been a long time since I heard scripture. Clara opened to a random page, her voice soft as she read by firelight. Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. She stopped, tears rolling down her cheeks. That's how I feel, Ethan. Whatever comes, wherever we go, I want it to be with you. He pulled her close again, his own eyes burning. Outside, the storm seemed to be weakening slightly, though snow still fell thick and fast. They talked through the night, sharing stories and dreams, fears and hopes. Clara told him about teaching herself to read using her father's books, about the poems she sometimes wrote on scraps of paper. Ethan shared memories of cattle drives, of nights under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, of the loneliness that had been his constant companion until now. As dawn approached, bringing a gray light that revealed a world transformed by snow, they heard something that made them both freeze horses approaching, their hoofbeats muffled but unmistakable. Ethan reached for his gun, pushing Clara behind him. Stay down! The door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and cold. But instead of Dalton or his men, a familiar figure stood silhouetted against the white. About time I found you two, Sam Hutchins said, stamping snow from his boots. Half froze myself riding through that storm. Sam, Clara exclaimed. What are you doing here? The old man grinned, showing his gap teeth. Bringing news, And supplies. Coffee's in the saddlebags, if you're interested." As Ethan helped him bring in the supplies, Sam explained, "Dalton's in a world of trouble. Seems Murphy grew a conscience after you left." "Admitted he lied about the money," said Dalton forced him to. "The mayor's none too pleased about his sheriff running folks out of town on false charges." "Is it safe to go back?" Clara asked hopefully. Sam shook his head. "Wouldn't recommend it. Dalton's still got friends, and wounded pride makes a man dangerous. But the good news is he can't legally pursue you. That bounty he was planning to post? Dead in the water." Relief washed over them, followed quickly by exhaustion. They were still fugitives in practice, if not in law, but at least they wouldn't have official hunters on their trail. "There's more," Sam continued, warming himself by the fire. "Found a preacher heading north. He's waiting with my wagon about 2 miles back. Figured you might want to make things proper before you reach Montana." Clara's hand found Ethan's, their fingers intertwining. "A preacher, if you're interested." Sam's eyes twinkled. "Though from the look of that ring on your finger, I'm guessing you might be." Ethan looked at Clara, seeing his own wonder reflected in her eyes. "What do you say? Want to marry a broke cowboy in a broken-down shack in the middle of nowhere?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "There's nowhere I'd rather be, no one I'd rather marry." Sam clapped his hands together. "Then let's fetch that preacher before he freezes to death. And Clara, I brought something else." From his pack, he pulled out a carefully wrapped bundle. Inside was a simple white dress, obviously old but clean and pressed. "Was my wife's," he said gruffly. "She'd have wanted it used for something happy." Clara's tears started fresh as she held the dress against herself. "It would fit, maybe a little loose, but it would fit." "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "Ah, get on with you," Sam said, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Let's make this official before that preacher decides we're all crazy and heads back to civilization." As Clara changed behind a hanging blanket, Ethan stood with Sam, looking out at the pristine snow. "Are you sure about this, boy?" Sam asked. "Marriage is a heavy thing, especially starting out like this." "I've never been more sure of anything," Ethan replied. "She's my home, Sam. Didn't know I was looking for one until I found her." Sam nodded, satisfied. "Then let's get you hitched." When Clara emerged in the white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, Ethan forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was his, and he was hers. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. "Ready?" she asked, suddenly shy. "I've been ready my whole life," he said, offering his arm. "Just didn't know it until now." As they prepared to step out into the snow to meet the preacher, Clara paused. "Ethan, that thing you said before about the rope?" He smiled, remembering. "The only rope I want is the one tied to your heart?" "Yes." She stood on her toes to kiss him softly. "Consider it tied, forever." Then they walked out into the new day, into their new life, while the snow fell like blessings around them and the future stretched ahead. Uncertain but no longer fearsome, because they would meet it hand in hand. The wedding had been 3 days past when they heard the horses. Clara was mending one of Ethan's shirts by the fire in the abandoned prospector's cabin they'd found, humming softly when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. Ethan was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Through the frost-covered window, he counted 6 riders picking their way up the narrow mountain trail. Even at a distance, he recognized the lead rider's arrogant posture. "Dalton," he said quietly, "get to the root cellar." "No." Clara stood, her chin lifting in that way he'd come to recognize as pure stubbornness. "I'm not hiding, not anymore." "Clara!" "We're married now, Ethan. That means we face things together." There was no time to argue. The riders were dismounting, spreading out to surround the cabin. Dalton's voice carried clear in the cold air. "Cole, I know you're in there. You've got something that belongs to me." "Nothing in here belongs to you, Dalton," Ethan called back. "That's where you're wrong." Dalton's laugh was ugly. "See, I invested time and effort in that woman, made plans. Then you came along and stole her." "You can't steal a person," Clara said, loud enough to be heard. "I was never yours." "Clara, honey, you're confused. Why don't you come on out and we'll discuss this civilized-like? Ethan checked his ammunition. 6 men. He had his rifle, his revolver, and Clara had the Derringer he'd given her as a wedding present. Not the most romantic gift, maybe, but practical. Here's what's going to happen, Dalton continued. You're going to send her out, and you're going to ride away. Go back to your drifting, cowboy. This doesn't have to end bloody. You're right, Ethan agreed. It doesn't. You and your boys can turn around right now and ride back to Deadwood. Tell folks you couldn't find us. No shame in losing a trail in these mountains. Can't do that. Dalton's voice hardened. See, you made me look weak. Took what I'd claimed, made folks laugh behind my back. That requires a reckoning. Ethan glanced at Clara. She was pale but steady, the Derringer held properly in her small hands. Whatever happens, he said softly, know that these last days with you have been worth a lifetime. Don't talk like that, she whispered fiercely. We're going to have years, Ethan. Years and years. The first shot shattered the window, showering them with glass. Ethan shoved Clara behind the overturned table and returned fire, his rifle cracking in the enclosed space. Outside, men scrambled for cover. What followed was the longest hour of Ethan's life. Bullets splintered wood, shattered the remaining windows, and filled the air with dust and gun smoke. He and Clara worked in concert, him with the rifle, her reloading and watching the blind spots. When 2 men tried to rush the back door, her Derringer spoke twice, sending them scrambling back. You shoot pretty good for a serving girl, Ethan said during a lull, trying to lighten the moment. You'd be surprised what a woman learns when she's on her own, Clara replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. The firefight raged on. Ethan took a graze across his shoulder, blood soaking his shirt. One of Dalton's men made it to the side window before Clara's quick thinking with a cast-iron pan sent him tumbling back. But they were running low on ammunition, and Dalton's men were getting bolder. Go, Dalton shouted. This is your last chance. Send her out, or we burn you out. Ethan saw the torch being lit, saw the determination in the men's movements. Fire in these dry mountains would be death for certain. He made a decision. I'm coming out, he called. No! Clara grabbed his arm. Ethan, no! Trust me, he said, kissing her quickly. When I go out, you go out the back. Scouts saddled behind those rocks. Ride hard for Sam's place. I'm not leaving you. You have to. He gripped her shoulders. Please, Clara, let me do this right. Let me protect you. Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. Ethan checked his revolver one last time, then stepped toward the door. I'm coming out, he repeated. Hold your fire! He emerged into the late afternoon sun, hands visible but ready. Dalton sat his horse like a king, triumph written across his face. Smart choice, cowboy. Now call her out. She's already gone, Ethan lied smoothly. Sent her out the back while you were busy shooting up the front. Dalton's face darkened. You're lying. Check for yourself, but she's got a good head start and a fast horse. That's when Clara did the last thing anyone expected. Instead of running, she emerged from the cabin, but not empty-handed. In her arms was the strongbox they'd found hidden in the cabin, the previous occupant's gold mining proceeds from the look of it. You want payment, Sheriff? She called out, her voice carrying clear and strong. Here's your blood money. Take it and leave us be. She threw the box down, and it burst open, scattering gold coins and nuggets across the frozen ground. The sight of it changed everything. Dalton's men, hired guns with no real loyalty, suddenly had their attention divided between their employer and enough gold to set them up for months. That's, one of them breathed. That's a fortune. Split 6 ways. It's a good payday, Clara said, standing beside Ethan now. Or you can keep following a crooked sheriff's orders and maybe die for his wounded pride. Your choice. Ethan watched the calculation in the men's eyes. Greed won, as Clara had gambled it would. Sorry, Sheriff, one of the hired guns said, dismounting to gather gold. But the lady makes a good point. Get back on your horses, Dalton roared. But his men were already scrambling for the scattered wealth. In the chaos that followed, Dalton made his move. His gun cleared leather fast, aimed not at Ethan but at Clara. If I can't have her, no one. The shots came almost simultaneously. Dalton's pistol fired, but Ethan was already moving, shoving Clara aside and taking the bullet meant for her. His own shot was true, catching Dalton's center mass and knocking him from his saddle. "Ethan!" Clara caught him as he stumbled, blood spreading across his shirt. "No, no, no, I'm okay," he gasped, though the pain was fire in his side. "Just need to sit." The hired guns, pockets full of gold, wanted no part of what had become a personal fight. They mounted up and rode off without a backward glance, leaving Dalton writhing in the dirt. Clara tore strips from her petticoat, pressing them against Ethan's wound. "Don't you dare die on me, Ethan Cole. We just got married. You promised me years." Still, planning on it, he managed, trying to smile through the pain. She left him just long enough to check on Dalton. The sheriff was still alive, but fading fast, his breathing labored and bloody. "Was she worth it?" Clara asked quietly, kneeling beside him. Dalton's eyes focused on her with difficulty. "You could have had everything. I already have everything," she said simply. "I have a man who sees me as a person, not a possession, who'd die to protect me instead of trying to own me. Romantic fool." Dalton coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Maybe, but he's my romantic fool." She stood, leaving him to his fate. There was no help coming, and they both knew it. Clara managed to get Ethan inside and properly bandaged. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing anything vital, but he'd lost blood and needed rest. As she worked, she heard Dalton's breathing stop, heard the silence that followed. She felt no triumph, only a weary relief that it was over. "Clara," Ethan said weakly, reaching for her hand. "The gold. I'll gather what I can. It'll give us a start in Montana." She kissed his forehead. "Rest now. I'll take care of everything." As the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Clara worked. She gathered the scattered coins, dragged Dalton's body to a respectful distance, and tended to Ethan. When Sam arrived the next morning, following the smoke from their chimney, he found them both alive, and the threat ended. "Looks like you had some excitement," the old man observed, taking in the bullet holes and blood stains. "It's finished," Clara said simply. "Dalton won't be troubling anyone again." Sam nodded, asking no questions. In the frontier, justice often came swift and final. "I'll help you get him to town. Ethan needs a real doctor for that wound." "No town," Ethan said firmly. "We're done with Deadwood. Just help us get to Montana. We'll find a doctor there." It took 3 days of careful travel, but they made it. In a small town called Sweetgrass, they found a doctor, a boarding house, and eventually, a small ranch for sale. The gold from the cabin, Dalton's ironic wedding gift, provided the down payment. As Ethan recovered, Clara proved herself as capable with ranch accounts as she'd been with Murphy's till. They hired good men, built up a small herd, and slowly carved out a life together. When the first snows came to their own land, they stood together on their porch, watching the flakes fall. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, his arm around her waist. "Only one," Clara said, leaning into him. "I wish we'd met sooner. Think of all the time we wasted being lonely." "Wasn't wasted," he disagreed. "Made us who we are, made us ready for this." He turned her to face him, seeing in her eyes the same love that had driven him to face down 6 men for her safety. "Besides, we've got years ahead. Years and years, just like you said." "A lifetime," she agreed, standing on her toes to kiss him. In the distance, a wolf howled, lonely and wild. But here, in their home, with the fire crackling and the snow falling soft as promises, Clara and Ethan Cole had found something worth more than gold. They'd found each other and the courage to fight for their love against all odds. The past was buried with Dalton in an unmarked grave. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And in the present, they held each other close, 2 souls no longer adrift, anchored at last by the strongest rope of all, the one that bound their hearts together. The doctor in Sweetgrass, a thin man named Doctor. Marcus Whitfield worked with steady hands despite Clara's hovering. Ethan lay on the examination table, trying not to wince as the doctor probed the wound that had barely begun to heal from their flight from the cabin. "You're lucky," Dr. Whitfield said finally, washing his hands in a basin. Inch to the left and we'd be having a different conversation. As it is, you'll need at least 2 weeks of complete rest." 2 weeks. Ethan started to sit up, then thought better of it as pain lanced through his side. "Doc, we've got a ranch to run." "You've got a wife who can handle things," the doctor interrupted, glancing at Clara with approval. "From what I've seen, Mrs. Cole is more than capable. Let her take the reins while you heal, unless you fancy dealing with infection or worse." Clara's hand found Ethan's, squeezing gently. "He's right. The ranch will survive. You might not if you push too hard." Over the following days, Clara proved the doctor right. She met with the hired hands each morning, distributed tasks, checked on the small herd they'd started building. The men, Tom Brennan and his younger brother Pete, had initially been skeptical of taking orders from a woman. That skepticism faded quickly when they saw she knew her business. "Mrs. Cole," Tom said one evening, hat in hand, "wanted to say we appreciate what you and your husband are building here. It's good to work for folks who treat men fair." "Thank you, Tom. That means a great deal." Word of their story had somehow spread through Sweetgrass like wildfire. The serving girl and the drifting cowboy, who'd faced down a corrupt sheriff for love. Some of the town's women were scandalized by Clara's past, crossing the street to avoid her. But others, particularly those who'd known their own hardships, offered quiet support. Mrs. Elizabeth Patterson, the banker's wife, was the first to call. She arrived in a proper carriage, dressed in black bombazine that rustled with every movement. But her eyes were kind. "My dear," she said, settling into Clara's simple kitchen chair like it was a throne. "I've heard quite a bit about you." Clara's shoulders tensed. "I'm sure you have." "Don't mistake me for those gossiping hens," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "I was a laundress before I married Mr. Patterson. Spent years scrubbing other people's dirty linen, literally and figuratively. I know what it's like to be looked down upon." The two women talked for an hour, and when Mrs. Patterson left, Clara had an invitation to the church social and a promise of introduction to the town's more progressive ladies. "Making friends?" Ethan asked from the doorway. He was supposed to be in bed, but had managed to make it to the kitchen, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. "Ethan Cole, you get back to bed this instant," Clara scolded, but she was smiling as she helped him to a chair instead. "And yes, I think I am. Mrs. Patterson seems genuine." "Good. You deserve friends. Deserve everything." He caught her hand as she fussed with the tea kettle. "I hate being useless while you do all the work." "You're healing. That's not useless." She touched his face gently. "Besides, I like taking care of you for a change. You've been taking care of me since that first morning in Murphy's." As Ethan recovered, their life began to take shape. The ranch was small, but had potential: good water, decent grazing, and a solid cabin that just needed some fixing up. Clara threw herself into making it a home. Curtains at the windows, a garden plot marked out for spring, a rocking chair by the fire where Ethan could rest while still feeling part of things. One morning, she woke feeling ill, barely making it outside before losing her breakfast. Ethan, moving carefully but steadier now, found her sitting on the porch steps, pale and shaking. "Should I fetch the doctor?" he asked, concern creasing his forehead. "No." She managed a wan smile. "I don't think he can help with this particular ailment." It took him a moment, then his eyes widened. "Clara, are you?" "I think so." Her hand went to her stomach instinctively. "It's too early to be sure, but—" Ethan sank down beside her, wonder replacing worry on his face. "A baby? Would that be— with everything so unsettled still?" He pulled her against him, careful of his healing wound. "It would be perfect. You'll be perfect. Our child will have the best mother in Montana Territory." Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb over the mountains, painting their land in shades of gold and green. This was what she'd dreamed of in those dark days in Deadwood. Not just escape, but a life worth living. The peace was broken by approaching riders. Ethan tensed, hand moving toward where his gun would be, but Clara recognized the lead horse. "It's Sam!" She was on her feet and hurrying to meet him before Ethan could protest. Sam Hutchins looked older than when they'd last seen him, but his gap-toothed grin was as wide as ever. Behind him rode a younger man Clara didn't recognize. "Figured it was time to check on you two," Sam said, dismounting with a grunt. "This here's my nephew Daniel, good with horses, looking for work." Over coffee and Clara's fresh biscuits, Sam filled them in on Deadwood news. Murphy's had closed after Murphy drank himself to death. Jake Morrison had been shot in a card game. The town had elected a new sheriff, a former marshal who actually believed in law and order. "Funny how quick folks forget," Sam mused. "Already Dalton's just a cautionary tale. You two are practically legends, though. The serving girl and the cowboy who fought for love." "We just wanted to be left alone," Clara said quietly. "Sometimes that's the biggest fight of all," Sam replied. "Anyway, brought you something." He retrieved a package from his saddlebags. "Wedding present. Bit late, but then nothing about your wedding was conventional." Inside was a beautifully carved wooden box. Clara opened it to find it lined with velvet, perfect for keeping precious things. "It's beautiful, Sam. Thank you." "My wife had one like it. Kept our marriage certificate, the kids' first drawings, that sort of thing." His voice went gruff. "Figured you might want something similar for making new memories." That night, as they prepared for bed, Clara placed their marriage certificate in the box, along with the bullet the doctor had removed from Ethan, a grim reminder of what they'd survived. Later, she knew there would be other treasures. A lock of baby hair, perhaps. A child's first attempt at writing. Years of memories yet to be made. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, watching her arrange things just so. "None," she said firmly. "Oh, I wish you hadn't been shot. I wish Dalton had just let us go. But if it all led us here, to this moment, then I can't regret it." He pulled her close, marveling as always at how perfectly she fit against him. Sam was wrong about one thing. We're not legends. We're just two people who found each other against the odds. "Maybe that's what legends are," Clara murmured against his chest. "Ordinary people who refuse to let go of what matters." The next morning brought new challenges. One of the cows was sick. A fence needed mending, and Daniel proved his worth by spotting signs of wolves near the property. But it also brought small joys. Clara felt the baby quicken for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings. Ethan finally felt strong enough to ride again, though Clara made him promise to take it easy. As she watched him work with the horses, still moving a bit stiffly but with his natural grace returning, Clara touched her stomach where new life grew. They'd started with nothing but determination and each other. Now they had land, a future, a child on the way. Mrs. Patterson had invited her to join the church quilting circle. It would mean facing down the disapproving looks of some, but also finding her place in this new community. She thought of the woman she'd been in Deadwood, invisible, enduring, accepting scraps of dignity. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth. "You look thoughtful," Ethan said, coming up behind her, smelling of horses and honest work. "Just thinking about how far we've come." "And how far we've yet to go," he added, hands settling on her waist. "But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The journey's not over. We're just getting started." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd changed everything simply by seeing her, truly seeing her, that morning in Murphy's. "I love you, Ethan Cole. And I love you, Clara Cole." He kissed her gently. Now and always, come what may. The sun climbed higher, warming the land that was theirs, the life they were building together. In Deadwood, Clara had been forgotten, overlooked, dismissed. Here, she was wife, soon-to-be mother, mistress of her own home, partner in creating something lasting. She thought of the rope Ethan had spoken of, the one tied to her heart. It bound them together, yes, but it also anchored them to this place, this life, this future bright with promise. Whatever storms might come, and there would be storms, life guaranteed that. They would weather them together. The baby fluttered again, and Clara smiled, pressing Ethan's hand to where their child grew. Here was their true wealth, their real victory, not gold or land or cattle, but love, family. The chance to write their own story on the blank pages of the frontier. Let others have their legends of outlaws and sheriffs, showdowns and shootouts. Clara and Ethan Cole would build something better, a life of quiet courage, everyday love, and the extraordinary miracle of two hearts bound together, come what may. Spring came to Montana like a blessing, melting the snow and revealing the green promise beneath. Clara stood on the porch of their completed home, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Ethan work with a new colt in the corral. 2 years had passed since that desperate flight from Deadwood, and sometimes she still marveled at the life they'd built. Their ranch had grown, 20 head of cattle now, a dozen horses, and crops planned for the fertile valley. The cabin had been expanded with a proper bedroom and a small room waiting for the baby. Everything they'd dreamed of in that snowbound shack was becoming real.
Mrs. Cole,"
Daniel called from the barn.
"that mare's ready to foal?"
Clara made her way carefully to the barn, where the mare they'd named Hope was in labor. It seemed fitting. New life arriving just weeks before her own child was due. She'd become the ranch's unofficial midwife for the animals, her gentle hands and calm presence soothing the beasts through their trials. Ethan appeared at her shoulder, still moving with a slight favor to his left side that probably always would remain. A permanent reminder of the price they'd paid for their freedom. "You should be resting," he said softly, but his eyes were warm with the pride that always showed when he watched her work. "I'll rest when Hope and her baby are safe," Clara replied, rolling up her sleeves. The birth was straightforward, and soon a beautiful bay filly stood on wobbly legs, nursing while Hope nickered softly. Clara leaned back against Ethan, tired but satisfied. "She's perfect," she murmured.
"Like her mistress,"
Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to Clara's temple. "Come on, let's get you inside. Daniel can handle things from here." As they walked back to the house, a rider appeared on the horizon. Clara tensed. Even after 2 years, unexpected visitors made her nervous. But as the figure drew closer, she recognized the distinctive hat. It's Sam. Their old friend had become a regular visitor, bringing news from the outside world and staying for Clara's cooking. This time, though, his weathered face was serious. "Got news you need to hear," he said without preamble once they were settled inside. "There's talk in Deadwood. Some folks saying Dalton had brothers, that they're asking questions about what happened." Ethan's hand found Clara's. "After 2 years, apparently they just heard. Been down in Mexico, from what I gather." Sam accepted the coffee Clara poured with steady hands despite the news. "Might be nothing, might be trouble. Thought you should know." They spent the evening discussing possibilities, but Clara found herself surprisingly calm. The woman who'd cowered before Dalton's threats was gone. In her place sat a ranch owner, a wife, a soon-to-be mother who'd faced down worse and survived. "Let them come," she said finally. "We've built something good here, something worth defending. I won't run again." Ethan studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Then we stand ready. Together." 3 weeks later, Clara's pains began just as the sun touched the horizon. Ethan sent Daniel racing for Dr. Whitfield while he stayed with Clara, holding her hand through each wave of pain. "I'm scared," she admitted between contractions. "You're the strongest person I know," Ethan said, smoothing her sweat-damp hair. "You can do this. Tell me again," she gasped. "About the rope." He smiled despite his worry. "The only rope I want is the one tied to your heart. It's held fast through gunfights and blizzards, through building this ranch and making this life. It'll hold through this, too." Dr. Whitfield arrived as full dark fell, bringing his calm competence and years of experience. The night was long, filled with Clara's determination and Ethan's steady presence. Then, as dawn broke over the mountains, a new voice joined theirs, the indignant cry of their daughter. "A girl," Dr. Whitfield announced, placing the baby in Clara's arms. "Healthy and perfect." Clara looked down at the tiny face, seeing Ethan's strong features softened by her own gentler lines. "Mary," she whispered. "After your mother." Ethan's eyes filled as he touched his daughter's perfect hand. Mary Elizabeth Cole. She would have loved that. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of feedings and diaper changes, of marveling at tiny fingers and toes. The ranch work continued around them, Daniel and Tom proving invaluable as Ethan split his time between his family and his duties. It was a peaceful morning, Mary sleeping in her cradle while Clara worked on mending. when the dogs started barking. Through the window, she saw 3 riders approaching. Her blood chilled as she recognized the family resemblance, the same cruel set to their mouths that Dalton had worn. "Ethan," she called quietly, and he was there instantly, reading the situation in a glance. "Take Mary to the root cellar," he said, checking his rifle. "No." Clara stood, back straight. "We faced this together, remember?" The riders stopped at a respectful distance. The eldest, a man who looked like Dalton, aged 10 years, spoke first. "You Ethan Cole?" "I am. This is my land. State your business." "I'm William Dalton. These are my brothers, James and Robert. We've come about our brother Sherman." "Then you've come a long way for nothing," Ethan said evenly. "Your brother's dead. Died 2 years ago trying to force himself on my wife. It was self-defense and the law cleared us." William studied them for a long moment. "We know what Sherman was. Knew it before we left for Mexico. Man was mean as a snake and twice as twisted." He shifted in his saddle. "We're not here for revenge." Clara stepped forward, Mary in her arms. "Then why are you here?" "Closure, ma'am, and maybe to apologize. Our family failed Sherman, let him become what he was. Heard you tried to pay him off, give him a way out. That was more than he deserved." The tension slowly eased as the truth of their words became clear. These weren't vengeful brothers, but men carrying the weight of family shame. "Would you—" Clara surprised herself by speaking. "Would you like some coffee? You've come a long way." And so, in a scene that would have been impossible to imagine 2 years ago, Clara served coffee to Dalton's brothers while baby Mary cooed in her basket. They talked of Sherman's childhood, of the darkness that had always lived in him, of their relief mixed with sorrow at his end. "You gave him a cleaner death than he'd have gotten elsewhere," William said finally. "And from what we've heard, you've made something good here. That's a better legacy than he left." When they rode away, Clara felt a weight she hadn't known she carried lift from her shoulders. The past was truly buried now, witnessed and released. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across their land, the Cole family sat on their porch. Mary slept in Ethan's arms, while Clara leaned against his shoulder, watching the stars appear one by one. "We did it," she said softly. "We're free." "We are," Ethan agreed. "Free to raise our daughter, build our ranch, live our lives without looking over our shoulders." "What do you want to teach her?" Clara asked, looking at Mary's peaceful face. "That she's worth fighting for. That love is stronger than fear. That sometimes the best thing you can do is stand your ground, and sometimes the bravest thing is to walk away. And that the strongest rope is the one that binds hearts together," Clara added. "Especially that." They sat in comfortable silence as night settled over Montana. In the barn, the horses shifted and nickered. From the pasture came the low sound of cattle. These were the sounds of home, of permanence, of dreams made real through courage and determination. Clara thought of the woman she'd been, serving coffee to men who didn't see her, accepting cruelty as her due, believing she deserved no better. That woman had died somewhere between Deadwood and here, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. "I love you," she told Ethan, words she'd never tired of saying. "And I love you," he replied, shifting Mary to one arm so he could pull Clara closer. "Both of you, all of us." A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, but it was just another night sound now, not a threat. They had built walls, not just of wood and stone, but of love and trust and shared purpose. Within those walls, their daughter would grow strong and free, never knowing the weight of being invisible, never doubting her value. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. "That every hard thing was worth it to get here. Every moment of fear, every mile we ran, every battle we fought, it all led to this. No regrets? None, not one." Mary stirred, making small sounds, and Clara took her to nurse. As their daughter fed, Ethan began to sing softly, an old cowboy ballad about wide skies and freedom. His voice was rough but tender, filling the night with melody. This was their happy ending, Clara realized. Not the dramatic finale of a dime novel, but the quiet joy of ordinary life made extraordinary by love. They would face other challenges, drought and winter, sickness and storms, but they would face them together, bound by the invisible rope that had held them through so much already. Tomorrow would bring its own work and worries, but tonight they were simply the Cole family, safe on their own land, under their own stars, writing their own story one peaceful moment at a time. As the moon rose full and bright over the mountains, Clara smiled. They'd traveled so far from that dusty morning in Murphy's eating house. The serving girl and the drifting cowboy had become ranchers, parents, pillars of their small community. They'd taken the broken pieces of their separate lives and built something whole and beautiful together. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan.
For what?
"For seeing me, for fighting for us, for this life." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for being worth fighting for teaching me that staying is better than drifting, for making us a family." Mary finished nursing and settled back to sleep, content and loved. Clara stood carefully, carrying her inside to the beautiful wooden cradle Ethan had carved with his own hands. As she tucked the blankets around their daughter, she whispered a promise. "You'll never be invisible, little one. Never doubt your worth. Your father and I will make sure of that." Outside, Ethan waited, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Clara joined him, fitting perfectly into the circle of his arms as she had since that first dance in a snowbound shack. "No rope but this one," he murmured into her hair. "Just your heart and mine, and now hers, bound together forever." "Forever," Clara agreed, and sealed it with a kiss. The night wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of home, of belonging, of love that had conquered fear and built something lasting. Somewhere, perhaps, people still told the story of the serving girl and the cowboy who defied a corrupt sheriff for love. But here, in this quiet corner of Montana, they were simply Ethan and Clara Cole ranchers, parents, partners, proof that sometimes the greatest adventures end not with gunfire, but with grace. Not with drama, but with the deep satisfaction of a life well lived and a love well tended. The rope that bound their hearts had held through every storm. Now it would stretch to encompass their children, their land, their future. An unbreakable bond woven from courage, trust, and the kind of love that makes the whole world new. This was their story, and it was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed the tale of Clara and Ethan, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories filled with romance, adventure, and the untamed spirit of the American West. What did you think of their journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one and love connecting with fellow Western romance enthusiasts.